about insurance? Because obviously this is something not just for small business, about everything from public liability, but the amount people are spending is thousands more than it was 3 years ago. Now, that might mean there's a lot more people claiming. It might mean that where the money comes from, but it just as an extra expense. Yes. So how can a federal government get involved in that process?
Well, there's market failure at the moment. There's no question about that. Insurance is up by 35%. Australians are paying thousands and thousands of dollars more each year, as you point out, Paul. And for many Australians, they're deciding to either self-insure, which is a very risky prospect unless you know what you're doing and you're a bigger business with a big balance sheet. But for some people, they're just making a decision not to renew their car insurance or not to renew their house insurance, and they don't have any choice. They just haven't got the money to pay that insurance. Now, there's either a market concentration problem or, as some of the companies will point out, there's a problem around reinsurance, and the reinsurance generally comes out of London, and it is having a catastrophic impact. We were in Victoria in the Grampians not too long ago with Anne Webster, just talking to businesses there. A local bloke who'd bought the pub, he couldn't settle a transaction because the bank wanted proof of the cover note and he couldn't get insurance. And he ended up having to change the finance arrangements to settle the deal. The transaction couldn't proceed. And the banks obviously want the insurance in place if they've got a mortgage against that property. So it's having all sorts of distortionary impacts in the economy. And for local shows and other groups who are just facing astronomical increases in their insurance as well, it's a huge problem. And I think it's one that the federal government can have an impact on, but at the moment the government just seems to have no interest in it at all.
Yeah. Joan has got a question for us. Joan is in Bateman's Bay, which is in the seat of Gilmore, Labor's most marginal, and one that is absolutely on the line on Saturday. Your question for Peter Dutton, mate.
Labor and the Greens have allegedly been discussing bringing in a death and inheritance tax. Is there a possibility that you would venture down this pathway if elected to government during your term?
Joan, I think we need to have a serious discussion about what is at risk at this election in terms of taxes. Prime Minister went into the last election saying there'd be no changes in relation to superannuation. We now find out that that's changed. The government has, as you're aware, a tax on unrealised capital gains. That means, in lay terms, if you've got shares, the shares go up in value. Even though you haven't sold the shares, you go to pay tax on that paper profit. So in some cases, people haven't got the cash to pay that, because it's like saying to a salaried employee, to a doctor or a nurse or a policeman or a taxi driver, well, you're going to have to pay the tax before you get paid the wage this week. For a business, they're going to have to pay for a valuation if they've got a farm, for example, in their self-managed super fund, or if you're a delicatessen, or if you're a mechanic and you've got a workshop in your superannuation fund, and that goes up through the course of the year, you're going to have to pay for a valuation. And what happens if the share market turns down next year and the shares are worth less than what they were valued at the year prior, even though you haven't sold them? So I think the government's created an enormous mess here. It is, in essence, an inheritance tax, because it's taking money away from people before they can access it for their superannuation or leave it to their children. And it goes beyond that. The government has done research, as we know. The Prime Minister doesn't want to acknowledge this, but the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, has commissioned the work in Treasury for negative gearing to be abolished and for the capital gains discount to be abolished as well. And of course, that is the first demand of the Greens in negotiations with Anthony Albanese after the election. And I think there is a lot at risk at this election in relation to new taxes that are likely to be imposed by a Labor Greens government. And I think we provide stability, and we've given assurances around no changes to negative gearing. Right from the very first day of announcement, we said that we wouldn't support Labor's proposal to tax unrealised capital gains. We've been consistent in that, and we always manage the economy more effectively than Labor, and we do it in relation to stopping these taxes, and we'll do whatever we can to stop Labor from imposing the negative gearing changes, because it'll drive up rents, it'll make it harder for young kids to get into housing, and it'll make it creates an aspect of sovereign risk where people don't want to invest into housing, which is the last thing we need at the moment.